Hi, I'm Nikolai. Today we'll be unboxing our February Basics box. This box is all about tinted graphite. We'll cover some specifics to the medium, do a warm-up sketch of a cityscape, and talk about the importance of drawing from life. We got a lot to cover and I'm really excited, so let's get into it. Our first item in this month's box is going to be a custom credit color pocket set. These watercolor graphite pencils are great because they allow for distinct sketching lines with the flexibility and subtle values of a typical watercolor. Here, I'll swatch out our pencils using the Monami pad from last month's box. If you're unfamiliar with graphite pencils, HB stands for the hardness of the lead. Anything with a higher H value will be lighter, and anything with a higher B value will be darker because it has softer lead. Here we can see the value difference between HB and 8B. Swatching out our colored graphite, we can see that drying, we don't get too much of that color. Now that'll change when we incorporate some water to it, but what's great about this is shadows and darker areas are always going to be more saturated, so that slight color tint works to our advantage. Let's grab the Prince Tint Round in size 3 that comes in this month's box and use it to activate our tinted graphite. Immediately we can see how the values change in those pencils. By adding a little bit more water, we can create a subtle gradient. Make sure to rinse out your brush between activating the pigment so that you don't muddy any of your values. Once we add water to our colored tinted graphite, we can start to see that really explosive color value that they offer. Our next 3 items are going to be a little bit lighter in value and put color first. These Color Tint Spectrum Noir pencils are a little bit closer to a colored pencil, as they're not as dark as a typical graphite. What I really love about these is the ability to add color without necessarily adding any darkness. By first applying water to our canvas and then going in with the pencils, we can achieve a much darker color as we're activating that pigment as we rub the pencil into our surface. Here we can see that the credit colors have a much darker value associated with them than the color tint. Next, we have the Derwent Graphitint Pan in Juniper. Pans are great as they allow us to treat the medium more like watercolor. Using a light hand, we can achieve subtle gradients, and by adding a little bit more water, we can transition it to more lighter values. Letting that initial layer dry, we can go back in and darken up that value by layering some more pigment. As a warm-up this month, let's do an urban sketch. Google Maps Street View is a great resource for these, as you can just pop into any city. As I lay out my sketch, I'm trying to keep my shapes as simple as possible. By keeping all my vertical lines parallel, I can help to ensure that my perspective is correct. By keeping my horizontal lines converging into one point towards the center of the piece, it helps to make everything look like it's on the same plane. Now, perspective can be very tricky, so don't expect to be perfect if it's the first time you're trying it out. With my basic shapes established, I'll go in with our brush and kind of blend out some of those lines and distribute my values. Value is just the concept of light and dark. So for us, the paper is typically our lightest value, and our 8B would be our darkest. Depending on how I hold my brush, I can make different marks, from fine lines with the tips to filling in larger areas with the side. Here, I'm leaning into the almond shape of the brush in order to create a kind of teardrop mark. With this mark, I can build out a bush for our setting. By distributing our values, we can create some more visual interest. This just helps to give things a little bit more form and to make it more pleasing to the eye. It's easy for things to get a little bit blurry when we're working with a brush, so I'm going back in with one of the pencils with the canvas fully dry to pick out a few details and to give it a little bit more structure. Now that we've got some solid value work, let's go in with the color tint and add some more color. Here, I've dipped the pencil in a little bit of water, that way that the pigment's activated when I go into the canvas. This allows us to lay in a lot of color really quickly. Because I have so much of that rust pigment on the canvas, I can go in with just water on my brush to blend out some of that color. Google Maps is a great tool if you want to work on cityscapes or just perspective in general. So next time you don't know what to draw, definitely jump in and give it a shot. While working from images online are a great resource, nothing can really replace drawing from real life. So this month, I wanted to take time to talk to you about still lifes. They can be made from anything around your house and are the best way to develop your sense of form, shape, and lighting. And they're a great excuse to buy yourself some flowers. When starting a still life, I typically try to start with one object. That way I can reference its height and width to the other objects in the scene. This helps to make sure that everything's in scale and proportionate to one another. I made my still life using a water bottle, the box that my art supplies came in, an apple, and a can and some flowers. It could really be anything. The simpler the forms, the easier it's going to be to render those, so don't set yourself up with anything too challenging right off the bat. Using my brush, I'll go in and blend out some of those lines, making sure that I'm not adding any graphite to areas that are really bright or in light. Using the color tints, I'll go in and establish some local colors of each of the object. This will help to keep them look separate from each other, but also help to establish a base value as I go in and build up the shadows. Now, with some of my local values and colors established, I can go in with a credit color set and start to emphasize the shadows in darker areas. Because we know that shadows are more saturated, so they're more rich in color, that's going to give our piece even more believability since we're using those to articulate the shadows. The pencils definitely allow us a bit more form and structure with our rendering, and they're a bit easier to control. For the flowers, I want to use just the brush and that Derwent pan, because I really love that juniper color. And I want our flowers to be a little bit more loose. There are a bunch of ways that you can represent floral elements. For smaller buds, I typically do dot work, or for medium-sized flowers, I'll do some simple petals. For roses or anything more complex, it's typically good to emphasize the shadows. That way you don't get caught up in how complex the petal systems are. As a final step, I like to go in and emphasize some edges with a dry pencil, and with that, our still life is done. Hope you enjoyed the video, learned a few things, and if you post your work online, make sure you use #SketchBox February. We love seeing what y'all create each month. And I'll see you next month.